So today's video is going to be a standalone book review on Becoming by Michelle Obama. I was initially just going to include this in my March wrap-up and then realised that I had a lot of things to say about it. So I thought I'd give it its own video. I did give this book 5 out of 5 stars. So right off the bat, this book follows Michelle, from growing up in the suburbs of Chicago, and then obviously going through her education, meeting Barack Obama, and then their life going into politics, and then obviously getting to the White House. So it's really about her full life really up until this point, and I was very excited to read this book. So Michelle grew up in the south side of Chicago to a fairly poor family, but despite that, she never felt like she went without. Her family they rented the top floor of her aunt's house. Her aunt lived downstairs, and even though she probably knew that they were on the poorer side, she never felt like she went without. Her parents always made sure there was food on the table, they had a warm house, and they knew that they were loved at the end of the day. It wasn't until she ended up going to Princeton, which was very exciting, that she realised that there were a whole privileged black community. Up until then, she just thought, the black community that she lived in at the time was obviously fairly poor. She didn't realise that there were people, the same colour, the same race as her, but came from more privileged backgrounds. And she worked, her butt off to get into Princeton. She was told, she won't ever get there. She's not gonna, just because of her background and, what society tells them, she wasn't gonna lead that pathway. And, she proved them all wrong. So this book obviously talks about her first encounter with meeting Barack Obama, and it was actually at her first job working for a law firm that she became his mentor. And she didn't think much of him at the time. It wasn't a love at first sight thing. She thought he was a late intern turning up, a bit quick-witted, and everyone thought he was good looking, but she didn't really think much of him. And it wasn't until they started working together, going to work events, that this friendship grew and eventually became a relationship. And it reminded me of that quote that behind every great man is a great woman, or along the lines of that. And it's funny that she was initially essentially in charge of him. She was his mentor. He had to go to her for guidance, and I thought that was quite funny, considering he became one of the most famous people and most influential people in the world. Not only do you find out about Michelle's lifestyle and growing up, the hardships she went through with losing family members and close friends very early on. So Barack was, his mother was born in the States and then moved to Hawaii, and that is when she met Barack's father, who was from Nairobi. That marriage lasted very shortly after they'd had him, and he moved back to Africa, where he apparently had a whole nother family. And Barack was brought up by his grandparents, actually primarily in Hawaii, when his mum moved to Indonesia. And even though his family was quite split apart, he never really seemed to be sort of affected by that or resented it. He was earning enough that he was able to travel to these places to go and visit them and see his extended family, and he loved his grandparents. And I believe he is also bringing out a book maybe later this year, so it would be interesting to read that, and then you've got like husband and wife books to read side by side. You never really got the sense that he felt a disjustice, or that he felt affected by not having like his whole family together in one place. And this book talks about how Michelle and Barack did long distance while, because he was a bit younger than her, he was still at law school for about 2 years, and so they were doing long distance relationship. And it really was quite reminiscent to me of when, you know, me and Darren used to do long distance, and then, you know, when you finally, you know, move back in together, and it's like all those simple things that you've missed, from like just putting the washing in of like both of your clothes, and like seeing both of your shoes side by side, or like just sitting on the couch and watching TV every night together. It just reminded me of like those, it's that sort of novelty things when you first like are back together, as in like in the same place. And there is a very funny anecdote about how Barack proposed to her. She didn't think initially he wanted to get married, and he completely tricked her and then proposed to her, and obviously they said yes. And you know, this book does show their struggles. It shows that they didn't have a perfect relationship. You know, they did argue at some points. Obviously, because of him going into the political world, they again had to do some long distance relationships. This time, obviously, with 2 very small children. They also struggled to have kids, and had both of their kids through IVF, which again was interesting because I was an IVF baby. So it was interesting to see that aspect, and you know how it can really put a strain on couples, but throughout they stayed really connected, and they worked hard for their marriage. And she knew, you know, this political business is not going to last forever. If he becomes president, you know, it's only going to last 4 years, and then it could only last 8 years. In the grand scheme of things, it's a small time frame, and that's sort of what she held on to. She did struggle with the idea of Barack going into politics, because she knew he would be away from home a lot, and you know what would be said about them, the struggles they would face. And they would spend every Christmas and sort of New Year in Hawaii, and their daughter was quite ill one year, and they weren't going to be able to fly back to this Congress meeting, and Barack obviously decided to stay with his family and with his child who was ill until they could all fly back together, despite Michelle saying, you know, you go on and go to this meeting. And, you know, he was slayed by Congress because, God forbid, he would stay with his sick child. They twisted it and made it seem like he didn't care about his job or the politics, and it's one of those careers that really, like, people think job comes first and nothing else. And they did go through some marriage counselling to really reconnect. And I think you always think of marriage counselling as like the end thing before someone gets divorced, whereas it's very common for married couples to have it to just like rekindle it and re-embrace their relationship, and it doesn't have to be like the final step before a divorce. And in this book you could really see how both of them, but specifically Barack, was always wanting to help people and just do more for the people. When Hurricane Katrina hit, he was like one of the first people to go down and, you know, visit the people and see what had happened down there. But, you know, all that really came at a sacrifice for them, because they put so much of their lives out in public, and, you know, they really had struggled with their privacy. They specifically talked about, you know, keeping their children out of the limelight, keeping them sort of as normal as possible. One of their daughters, Malia's birthday, is on the 4th of July, and obviously they had to have a big, you know, public event as the president, and like meeting with all these people. But at the same time, they used it as a chance for her to have a birthday party, and really she knew nothing else. Like, that was just sort of how her life had become, and, you know, she thought it was one of the best days ever, whereas they thought, you know, what a shame that she didn't get like her own day. We could just like focus on her rather than having to do, you know, this political side of it as well. And she does talk quite a bit about how they had that fine balance between, you know, letting them just live as kids, and because they obviously had to have, you know, people with them all the time as well, and bodyguards, and Michelle really wanted to make sure that they felt that they could live as normal a life as possible, because at the end of the day, you know, she wasn't the one that technically went into politics. She just married a politician. She didn't really ask to be in that limelight, but all she wanted was to be, you know, a good wife, a good mother, and support her family as best as she could. one thing I found interesting when she talked about her time in the White House and, you know, what she did, she mentioned how, yes, they get to live in the White House for free, but they still have to pay for, like, all their food, all their amenities. Obviously they get a lot of things, you know, gifted to them and things like that because they are, you know, the president and the first lady. But they still had to pay a lot of things, and they were very sensible with their money and very cautious with it. And I think that was probably through, you know, how they grew up, and they were brought up very well, both of them. And she also talked about, you know, her first main project. You know, she came to the White House. Barack had all these things set out that he'd said he wanted to do. She felt like she needed to have her own little project to work on. She didn't just want to be the first lady that stood back and just watched her husband. And she ended up planting a garden in the White House. And no first lady had done that in decades. And she was one of the first ladies to really do that. And, you know, encourage people to eat healthier, and especially in children. And that was something that she really put her mark and her stamp on. So like I said, I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was really interesting, all the different topics it covered, from politics, relationships, marriage, children, you know, privacy. Everyone can take away something different from this book, and that's what I really liked from it. So yes, I would highly recommend reading this book. If you've read it, let me know, leave me a comment down below, and I will see you in my next video. Bye guys! So I have brought Darren in for this segment of the video because he has listened to the book on audiobook. So tell us what you thought, Darren.
I think it was very, very good. I thought it was very motivational. She came from a poor neighbourhood where she didn't have, you know, the opportunities that other people would, but her mum and dad made sure that she did. They worked really hard, working class family, you know, just like a normal everyday family really. So it just shows you can go from nothing to being the president. Well,
he did, but yeah.
Yeah, being the first lady. So, no, but she does care a lot about the people. She's done a lot for people as well. Also giving people opportunity in colleges, and no, she's done a lot, and I just found it really interesting. And if you wanted to not read a book and just listen to an audiobook, I definitely recommend that one. Her voice is very relaxing as well.
She reads it herself.
Yeah, so she reads it herself, so it's really relaxing, and, you know, especially on the way to work, sometimes it takes about 45 minutes. So I listen to that.
It's a long book to listen to, isn't it?
Yeah, it's about 19 and a half hours, 20 hours of audio time. But I've been going to a few trips up and down the country lately, so, you know, I think I did a good chunk this week. I think I've done about 10 hours this week of audiobook, so, you know, it can be done, but I definitely recommend it.
You think you'll go for other audiobooks now?
Yeah, I've got Tim Peake, also.
Oh, will Darren have a monthly segment on the channel, what audiobooks he's read?
And I've got Mike Massimino. Massimino.
Another astronaut.
And I've got the other one.
A Love Letter Life, which I just did a book review on.
Yeah.
That's your next one, so then we can film your reaction to it.
Yeah, so no, I've got plenty.
Else?
No, I've got a load of credits, but, you know, got to take my time.
Cool. Anything else you want to say on the book?
No, it was very good, and
out of 5 stars, how many stars would you give it?
a 5.
Oh, high praise.
Most definitely, I'd definitely read it. Even if you're a guy as well, you know, definitely read it.
And there we
There's
go.
a lot of things to get out of them.
Thanks, Aaron. You can bugger off now. Literally. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.